It's still loading, so let's give it one more minute or so. Okay, Matt, I think we're down to single digits loading in, so we can start whenever you're ready.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Rutgers Business School Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Matthew Carr, and I'm the coordinator of student experience and engagement, and it's one of my privileges to be able to coordinate this series. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Lisa Kent and the Illuminations Group, our sponsors for today's talk. Lisa Kent and the Illuminations Group are friends to RBS. Not only is she an adjunct professor in our undergraduate marketing and master digital marketing program, but she has hired and helped many RBS grants. Illuminations has been around for almost 20 years and focuses on offering innovation and strategy solutions to clients in all sectors. Before Illuminations, Lisa worked in traditional consumer packaged goods at Johnson & Johnson, Nestle, and Procter & Gamble. She says she is delighted to present to our first Distinguished Leader Speaker Series with Colin, Bryar, and Bill Carr today. We'd also like to thank Rutgers Business School Dean's Office, as well as Professor Luke Greeley, for allowing us to host this session in his class. And now I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Lisa Kent.
Hello, everybody. Glad you're here with us today and really excited to be presenting the first Distinguished Leader Speaker Series session of 2021. I am privileged to bring you Bill Carr and Colin Bryar, early Amazonians who are going to share with us secrets of Amazon leadership tenets, hiring practices, which is important to all of you folks who are starting to think about job hunting. And importantly, how did innovation work at Amazon and how can we apply that today? They also are going to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I have a bunch of questions for them, and certainly with the recent announcement about Amazon's leadership, I know they'll have a lot to share with us. You are also welcome to put questions in the chat as we go through the conversation or at the end of their presentation. And I will do my best to curate those and get them answered for you. Anything we cannot answer in the chat, we will actually try to send a follow-up email, and the follow-up email will also have the link to today's session, which is being recorded. So with that, I will turn it over to Bill and Colin and say a great big thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you to the Rutgers community for giving Colin and I this opportunity to come and speak with you today. So my name is Bill Carr, and I spent 15 years at Amazon.com, joined back in 1999. And most notably, I spent a decade as the founding leader for what today is known as Amazon Music, Prime Video, and Amazon Studios. So hopefully some of you have listened to music on Amazon or watched movies and TV shows on Prime Video. And if so, that was work that my team and I did. I'll turn it over to Colin.
Yes, thanks for having us here. And so I'm Colin Bryar. I started at Amazon in March of '98 in the software group. And believe it or not, you could fit the whole software team in a conference room at that point in time. And we were just selling books just in the US at the time. So I spent a little over 12 years at Amazon, a bunch of different roles in the software group, and ended up managing our affiliate program. And then from 2003 to 2005, I spent 2 years working with Jeff Bezos as his technical advisor. Outside, it's really called the chief of staff, and internally they called it Jeff's shadow. So it entailed spending 10 hours a day with Jeff for 2 years. So got a really good feel for how he wanted to build and scale Amazon. It was a pivotal time. And then I spent 5 years at IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Amazon, as their chief operating officer.
So back in 2017, in my post-Amazon career, I was at a conference with the venture capital firm that I was working with at the time called Mavron. And at that conference, there were a number of CEOs there, and the topic of Amazon came up. And one of the most distinguished, experienced CEOs said, Amazon, I don't understand how Amazon does it. How have they been able to be so successful in everything from cloud computing to digital media to e-commerce? We're still trying to get our core business right, yet they are leading the world in multiple categories. How do they do it? And I shared this conversation with Colin a few days later, and we realized 4 things. First, we realized that many people have asked and tried to answer this question before, but we also realized there's really no good or accurate answer or authoritative source of information that tells people how does Amazon do it. We also realized that based on our experience, our combined 27 years of the company, and the front row seat we had to the process of product innovation and process innovation of the company, that we were the best qualified people, among the best qualified people in the world to answer that question. Finally, we realized that the Amazon way, or how Amazon actually does work, is something that any leader or anyone in business working at any company of any shape and size can learn from. And there are tools and processes that they can bring to make their business better too. So based on that, we decided to write a book to answer these questions with the goal of helping you, the next generation of business leaders, so you too can learn to be like Amazon.
So Amazon has a very diverse portfolio of businesses, from Amazon Prime, the retail business, Kindle devices and services, and Echo, a B2B business with Amazon Web Services and streaming digital goods. Those are very different business, have different operating characteristics, and require different levels of expertise and areas of expertise to build and operate them. And they've been talked about quite a bit in the press and analyzed individually. But what we felt was not really covered too much is, well, what do they have in common? And that's what our book is really all about. What they do have in common is they were all built using the same way. And what we call, and it's the same way what we're calling the invention machine. And what that is, the invention machine is a set of leadership principles, and then along with a set of scalable, repeatable processes. And they're here, how Amazon hires, organizes, communicates, develops products, is working backwards in metrics. So taken together as a whole, this is really all of the products that we showed in the services on that last screen were developed using this invention machine. And especially given the light of recent events with Jeff transitioning to the board role, we've been asked a lot in the past 48 hours, what's Jeff and Amazon's legacy going to be? At some point in the not too distant future, these hockey pucks and cylinders that we have, we talk to in our kitchen or in our dorm room, or, thinking 1 day or 2 day delivery as a premium customer experience, those are going to become laughably primitive because, things are going to move on. We think that this invention machine is really going to be one of Amazon's enduring and lasting legacies, because as Bill mentioned earlier, this is applicable to a wide variety of businesses. It's tried and true in all those different businesses we mentioned above. It actually works in large and small organizations too. Most of these were started out and used by groups at Amazon that were just a handful of people, to develop very large businesses. So we're excited to go into a bit of detail here, tell you what this invention machine is about. And the first thing is the leadership principles. And that really underlies everything Amazon does. If you talk about, it's really Amazon's DNA. And Amazon has 14 of them, which is unusually large for a company, but they're not just posters on the wall. And so don't worry, we're not going to go over all 14 of them here. You can find them online. Amazon publishes them. But a couple notable things about this is, one, that it's 14, but the second one is how do people remember and embody them at Amazon every day? And what Amazon did is all the processes that we talked about, we showed above, they're built from the ground up with these leadership principles in mind. And so as we'll go through and talk about some of those, you'll see some of these things like dive deep, deliver results, customer obsession. They actually shine when you look at these processes. Amazon is a growing company, face the same challenges that all growing companies face, but they came up with a set of different solutions. And it's really because they started from the set of first principles. And so the last thing I'll say about the leadership principles is how they're used is really, Jeff put a lot of effort into them because he knew that he was not going to be able to be in the room when all of the important decisions were being made. So he wanted to have a common decision-making framework for everyone at Amazon to make the tough calls. So this is what we relied on whenever there's ambiguity, we needed to move fast. We'd rely on these Amazon leadership principles to help guide us to make the right decision.
So now I want to dive into the different processes at Amazon. The first one I want to talk about is how Amazon conducts hiring. And at Amazon, it's called the bar raiser hiring process. So quickly, how this process works is it's distinctive in a couple of ways. First of all, the people who are interviewing at Amazon actually have distinctive assignments of what data they're trying to collect. And specifically, the data they're trying to collect in the interview is to find out from each candidate to get examples of how they have worked in the past relative to the 14 Amazon leadership principles. So many of you are either already interviewing for jobs or will be interviewing for jobs very soon. And you may be wondering, well, how do I ace the Amazon interview, or how do I ace an interview in general? So specifically for an Amazon interview, the way you prepare is by, it sounds corny, but go Google Amazon leadership principles and you'll find the 14 leadership principles and the descriptions of each one. Study those very carefully. And then think about work you have done, whether it be in school, in your clubs, or internships, summer jobs, whatever it might be, where you have maybe got an example where you demonstrated that principle. Like maybe for customer obsession, maybe you've had a job waiting tables, and you could give an example of where you went above and beyond the call of duty to meet the needs of a customer. And maybe dive deep. Maybe you had an assignment or at school or at work where you had to really dive into the details of the data and understand an issue, a complex issue in a really detailed way. And that'd be a great example of how you dive deep. Thinking big, that may be a harder one for you to do, but that's about how do you think about, given an opportunity, how do you think about it in a really big way? So in some cases, I realize it may be challenging for you all because some of you may not have a lot of work experience, but you can prepare, frankly, by doing this exercise. Not only would it prepare you well for an Amazon interview, but it actually prepare you very well for an interview with almost any company, because these examples and these leadership principles are things that be attractive to people in many companies around the world. And so specifically when you get in the room with an Amazon interviewer, they're going to ask you, every question they ask you is going to begin with, tell me about a time when X. So specifically at Amazon, they don't ask brain teaser questions like, how many windows are there in downtown Newark? They're going to ask questions like, tell me about a time when you went above and beyond the duty for above and beyond the call of duty for a customer. Again, the questions are going to relate back to the Amazon leadership principles. So brain teasers are sort of are not something that Amazon uses because they don't really actually tell someone, like tell a company how you will actually behave when you get there. For what it's worth, is also the company seeks to remove a lot of bias through the interview process by being objective in data gathering, by trying to assemble a diverse panel of interviewers as much as possible, and by making all of the assessment based on data and trying to remove biases about confirmation bias or personal biases as much as possible. So I could talk all day about the bar raiser process, but I'm going to move on to the next one. So the next process I want to talk about is how Amazon actually organizes their teams. So Amazon in the early 2000s started to grow quickly. and we were getting bogged down by bureaucracy. What tends to happen at most companies is as you grow, it requires much more time and coordination between teams and different departments in order to get important initiatives done. And especially in the early stages of a company, if you have a monolithic code base, it's very difficult then to have specific teams own and run and deliver software. So what Amazon figured out is to not only break down the monolith into a services-based architecture to enable teams to run fast, but also to extend that thinking actually to business teams. And as much as possible, say, when there's a new initiative or new product identified, to put in charge a single threaded leader who would work on nothing else than that new initiative, and to build a team of people underneath that person that's appropriate to the size of the initiative that also focuses on nothing else. As the senior vice president of devices at Amazon, Dave Limp, once said, the best way to fail at inventing something is by making it somebody's part-time job. So instead, what you focus on is how do you to make new initiatives and new important products come to life, you need to put people on it who are capable of actually getting across the finish line and focus on nothing else.
One of the processes that Amazon is famous for is its narratives, which it's another word for a 6-page memo. And Amazon switched from using traditional slides in meetings where someone would get up in front of the room and present slides or via Zoom now. But we switched in 2004 after a series of particularly painful meetings as the business was getting more complicated, and we were trying to make decisions, and there were a bunch of well-meaning, smart and well-intentioned people in the room, but we just couldn't get the right information to make decisions. We'd also been reading some work by Edward Tufte, who was a professor at Yale at the time, talking about what is the best way to convey information. And we just made a switch, and we experimented in 2004 and said, we're not doing PowerPoint anymore at these management meetings, where every team is going to have to come in with memos, 6-page narratives. And it turned out to be one of the better moves Amazon has made. And this is just another example of where Amazon looked at something and made a non-traditional choice. And really, Amazon switched to narratives, and why they work at Amazon and why we encourage other organizations who work to use them to make complex decisions is because the first thing that it does is it really forces the writer or the team of writers, because it's often a team presenting, to synthesize their thought and to achieve clarity of thought. You can throw some slides together and get up in front of a group of people and just start chatting away. But to write a good 6-page narrative, it takes time. It takes multiple days, multiple iterations. But what you end up with is a great body of work with clarity of thought. The second thing that it does is narratives remove a lot of bias. You can have great charismatic presenters presenting a so-so or even bad idea and convince the people in the room to go along with that. Or the flip side is you can have someone who's not a great presenter, doesn't really, not too good at it, doesn't like it, but has a great idea. And that may just get lost in the weeds because it's such a boring presentation that you want to move on. You can't wait to get out of the room. And so narratives remove bias. The other thing is, if you just take a look at the information density, one in terms of the pixels, of words and sentences and paragraphs versus, clip art and bulleted points, that's about 7 to 9 times the pixel density. People read faster than people talk. And then when you add all that up, it's about 10 times as much information that you're conveying from the presenting team to the writing team. And so, and then the last thing it does, narratives can actually help with, these multi-causal relationships. PowerPoint imposes a hierarchical argument, and, you go from one slide to the next, and ideas in the real world don't work that way. So narratives, fit what reality is. And in the end, what that does is that allows you to make better decisions with the same unit of time. An hour spent reading and discussing a narrative is the same as an hour listening to a PowerPoint slide and asking questions, but you just exit that meeting making higher quality decisions. And so we're jumping through this stuff really fast. And we are using slides to go over with this, but that's just the format that works best with a 1 to 350 people or 2 to 350 people. But the next process is the working backwards process. It's so important and critical to Amazon that it's the title of our book. And what working backwards is, it's the process Amazon uses to vet ideas and figure out whether they're worthy to bring to market or not. So super important. And at its heart, if you really want to understand the working backwards process at Amazon, it's starting with the customer experience first and foremost, and then working backwards from that to figure out what you need to do. And this is different from the way a lot of organizations make decisions, and also, what's taught in a lot of schools. A lot of companies use what's called the skills forward approach. And that they look at, well, what are we good at as a company? What are our core competencies? And, the SWOT analysis is a typical thing that people look at. What are our strengths, weaknesses? What are the opportunities and threats? What are our competitors doing? How can we nudge and take 2 or 5 or 10% of this market share? But what's not really mentioned in that is the word customer. And so Amazon inverted that and just said, we are going to focus on the customer first and foremost, and then figure out what we need to do. And even if what we need to do isn't something we're good at the time, or we don't have a competency, then we know that we either have to go get that competency somehow, partner or develop it in-house, or the idea is not what, it's something we're going to take care of. And so the two that we can pursue. But the two really main tools of the working backwards process are the PR and FAQ. So PR is press release, and FAQ is the frequently asked questions. So the first thing a team or a person will do if they have an idea, they'll say, okay, go do the working backwards process. And they write a 1-page press release. And that has to clearly outline what is the customer problem that we're trying to solve? What is the solution, and why should the customer use that? And it's hard to distill in 1 page, but if you read that press release and you as a customer aren't interested in using the service or buying the product, you got to go rewrite the press release. You go back. So this is an iterative process. Once you get to that point where you have something that there's something here, then you move on to the FAQ stage. And that's really broken up into 2 components. There's an external FAQ where you explain things to the customer, like, how much is this going to cost me? Why should I buy this versus what's out there on the market? Why should I change my behavior? But then the internal FAQs, those won't be released outside, but those are things that the tough questions and problems that the company needs to face and solve and organize around in order to bring this thing to market. How can we, examples would be, how can we build this device with the bill of materials under $200 that has these set of features? If it requires a sales force, we don't have a direct sales force. Are we going to partner with someone or build our own in-house sales force capability? Sometimes there are thorny technology issues that need to be solved in order for this solution to go to market. So what the working backwards process and these FAQs do is they make you focus on what are the most important and critical issues that you need to solve in order for this thing to do and to bring to market. And again, if you don't, most of the ideas go through this cycle many, many times, and a good chunk of them don't even make it out the other end. You realize it's not worth doing, or it's not worth doing now. But it really forces you to address the issues head on, and it saves time overall, because you're not wasting typically what is a bottleneck resource in the company, which are technical resources doing prototypes or bringing things to market that aren't really thought out.
Okay, the last process I want to talk about is metrics. So you've written your PR FAQ, you've launched this product. Now, how do you manage this business? So at most companies, what you'll find is you'll go inside, and most people are talking about output metrics. And what's an output metric? Revenue, gross margin, free cash flow, financial metrics. The problem with actually focusing excessively on financial metrics is that you can't actually design the specific activities you should undertake as a company to influence them. And so instead, what you want to focus on, what Amazon does, is they focus almost exclusively on input metrics, controllable input metrics. Okay, so what's a controllable input metric? So let's think about shopping on Amazon. One of the most important metrics for you is, first of all, well, does the item that I'm looking for, is it on Amazon? Okay, so that's a controllable input metric, which is when people search for a certain set of Bluetooth headphones, does Amazon have it? Okay, the second controllable input metric is that item actually in stock and available to ship to that customer? Okay, that's another input metric, and you can come up with all kinds of ways to measure that. A third one would be, okay, now the customer orders that item. How long does it take from the time that you click on order to that item showing up at someone's doorstep? And secondarily, if we promised 2-day delivery for that item, what % of the time are we actually meeting that promise? So every single one of those metrics, the word revenue or margin doesn't appear in any of them, but it turns out that those metrics that I just described, along with what's the price of the item relative to competition, are in fact the most important controllable input metrics that drive Amazon's retail business. If they can, and what the company figured out is that no matter how, whether it's 1999 or 2021, people will always care about those things. Always care about, do you have the item I want? Is it a good price? Can you get it to me fast? Can you be reliable? And by working on those things, Amazon's been working on literally those same metrics for more than 20 years. And by working on them over and over again, that metric has then resulted in the right output metric, which is revenue and customer growth. And oh, by the way, yes, things like free cash flow and gross margin. So it's not to say that financial metrics aren't important to the company. They're super important. But what the company figured out is you can't focus on those. You got to focus on the things you can control that will matter to customers. So this is what's really interesting about Amazon, and what you too can take away and focus on as in your careers as leaders. Okay, so that all these things comprise the invention machine. And actually, that's not a name we came up with. Jeff himself stated, at Amazon, we've built an invention machine, which is why Amazon, even beyond Jeff, is going to keep cranking out amazing products and services that the world loves. So I want to talk to you all, a lot of you, about where you are in your career and give you a bit of career advice. So, and my advice to you is to be like Andy. So as of 3 days ago, I bet that 99% of you had no idea who this person is, Andy Jassy. Well, hopefully 99% of you or more now know who this man is, because he's about to become the second CEO of Amazon.com, one of the biggest companies in the world. And Colin and I have known Andy since 1998. We worked alongside him. In fact, Andy was the first shadow to Jeff Bezos, and Colin was the second shadow. And Colin then spent hours and hours of meetings with Andy and Jeff figuring out what would Amazon Web Services be, which is the business that he built. So, but let me tell you a few things about Andy and how those of you who are in the state of New Jersey can learn about how a kid from Scarsdale, New York, and by the way, I'm a kid from Jenkintown, Pennsylvania, right not far away, found their way to Seattle to have big jobs, and ultimately Amazon, Andy's case, one of the biggest jobs in the world. So first of all, Andy thought long-term. When Andy came out, Andy went to Harvard Business School, and coming out of there, he could have had all kinds of different jobs. He could have had high-paying jobs at investment banks, consulting firms. Instead, the guy decided to go work for a company back in 1997 called Amazon that was a fly-by-night operation that was not making money and was paying him probably 1/3 of what he was going to make by going to one of these other companies. And so he didn't go for the highest salary. He went for what he thought was the best opportunity. And he also went to a place where he could keep his options open, and where he realized that he would have the opportunity probably to take on a lot of different roles in the company. Earlier in your career, you often don't really know what you're going to love or what kind of work is going to be the most fun for you. So going to a place where you can actually take on a variety of roles is really helpful. The second thing I'll say about Andy is that he faced many setbacks. So a lot of people think like, oh, this guy Andy, like he's had it easy, and it was preordained that he's going to become the CEO of Amazon. This is not the case. So let me tell you about this guy. He started off in the marketing department at Amazon, and it turned out that that was actually a lousy place to start your career. He had 4 or 5 other recently minted MBAs that had joined at the same time as he did. And because unfortunately the marketing department was not a highly valued department at that time by Jeff and the CEO, and the head of marketing got fired about every 6 months, this held Andy's career back. And instead, some of his peers were actually getting promotions faster and had landed in different divisions in different parts of the company and were moving ahead faster. Furthermore, later in his career, he progressed to become the director of marketing. And some new guy came into the company who had all this experience at Procter & Gamble, who was also a director of marketing. And this guy was really good at wowing the senior management and impressing people, where Andy was kind of just heads down, knew his work, and was putting in good results, but was not like flashy. And it seemed like Andy was going to lose out to this guy on becoming the head of marketing. And I can only imagine how Andy felt about that. The good news is that over time, that new guy ended up moving on from Amazon, and Andy ended up taking a big leadership role in marketing. But you'll find that you will have setbacks. You will have time when you're not fully appreciated. You can't pick who you're going to work with. And sometimes some people you work with are going to be turkeys, and you can't let the turkeys get you down. The next thing is that Andy took well-calculated risks. So the first risk he took is he joined Amazon. He didn't do the sure thing of joining McKinsey or Goldman Sachs. He took a risk. And then he took another risk. So after he came out of being Jeff's shadow, he could have kind of had any job in the company. So did he take a job running a multi-billion-dollar business? No. He ended up actually saying, I'm going to go work on this idea for web services, which at that point was just a new technology that no one really knew how to use. No one had any idea this would even become a big business. And most people in the company were skeptical that AWS was even a good idea at all. Andy had done his homework, had studied the details of AWS, and he decided, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go start with a team of 0, and I'm going to go build this out. And then finally, Andy was patient. The AWS incubation period, by the way, it took about 18 months of him and his team writing PRFAQs, refining what they would do before they wrote any code and launched anything. And then a few more years before it became a big business. So it was 10 years into his Amazon career that now he was sitting on top of a rocket ship. Finally, he worked long, hard, and smart. Andy was a hard worker. He's a smart guy. He would dive into the details. I'd see him at the office late at night. There is no substitute for this. And so Colin, I'd like to pass on to you that if you try to be like Andy, this will serve you well in your career. And I wish you all the best there. So that's our presentation today. You can, hopefully what you found this useful. There's a lot more detail in our book, Working Backwards, which comes out next week. You can visit our website. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lisa.
Hi, everybody. So before we go, this last slide is just letting you know some of the upcoming Distinguished Speakers Series presentations. The next one is Irv Rothman, and then the flyer lists a few of the other folks coming soon. So I hope you will attend them all and learn from them all. And I will tell you, this presentation, Bill and Colin, evolves every time I see it, and I thought it was terrific today. And we already have some questions. The first thing that I want to say, we will not get to all questions, but some of the questions are very well covered in the book. So I want to remind you all that this is a pre-launch of the book, and the book is available for pre-sale on Amazon. And I'm going to ask Bryar to put the link in the chat now so everybody can see. That's the link to their website. I want to put the link to the book on Amazon so they can go straight to Amazon and make a pre-order purchase. And also, as part of my sponsorship for today's session, in a world where we didn't have COVID, maybe Colin and Bill would have been with us in our building, up in the lounge, having cocktails or at least lunch together, and they could have signed books for you. Instead, I have a select number of books that they're going to sign via a placard, which I will place in the books and I will send to some of you. We'll have a random drawing for faculty, students, and alums to receive the books. And we'll coordinate that, and you'll get an email letting you know you'll be receiving a book when the book is out and signed for you. So as I said, though, I encourage you not to wait and order your book now. Some of the questions are answered in the book. And I have a bunch of questions that I wanted to cover with Colin and Bill as well. The first one, I think that's on everybody's mind. I had a question, which was, you see Jeff Bezos on camera a lot talking about his motto of work hard, have fun, make history. There's no question that's the case. Normally I would ask, so what was the most fun thing about working with him and working at Amazon? I'm still going to ask that. And of course, I'm going to ask, what do you see in the future? What big changes? What do you think he's going to do? And what's going to happen with Andy? Either one of you or both.
Well, Jeff, he's still going to be involved in the company, and he's even said he's going to work with some of the new initiatives and that Amazon's working on, and what the CFO Brian Olstowski called one-way doors, decisions where if you make those, they're irreversible decisions. It's hard to go back. And quite honestly, Jeff has been doing that for a long time, even back when I was with Jeff's shadow. If you took a look at his calendar, about half of it, I would say, was focused on businesses that were not generating any revenue, that really didn't exist, that we are trying to figure out in how to invent and create. So Jeff is still going to be working on those things. And then he also, a good chunk of the calendar was also put in, how do you develop and refine and hone this invention machine and evangelize that? So one thing is that if you are in a leadership position, the biggest thing is not necessarily the biggest opportunity in the future. So he's going to be working on things that none of us know what's going to happen until a couple of years down the road. And then Jeff, he's got a bunch of other interests. He's got the Day One Foundation, which is early education, the Bezos Earth Fund, working on climate change, Blue Origin, which is how do you get people and material into space. He's essentially doing the undifferentiated heavy lifting on how you get things cheaply and reliably into space, and kind of the AWS of space, if you will. So those are big, meaty problems that are going to take some time and attention. So he's going to be focusing on that too. And then in terms of what Andy is, he kind of has the perfect resume for this CEO job, and he knows the culture just as well as anyone. And, I think you're going to see more of the same, because, the inventions will be quite different, just because customers are going to demand and require Amazon to invent new things. The process will be the same. And you won't notice Andy's personal impact probably for at least another 12 to 18 months, because a lot of the things that are going to come out in the next 12 months, those seeds have already been planted a year or two or more ago. And, those will have already been underway.
Great. Bill, maybe for you or Colin, either one, there were some questions about our leadership principles that you've discussed, and how did they emerge? And I recall our conversation that they're not finished, right? That they're reevaluated. So you can talk, if you would, a little bit about where do they come from? They don't come just from Jeff Bezos. And how do we get to 14, and are there going to be more?
Yeah, so the leadership principles are solving a problem that every successful entrepreneur, by successful, I mean they start a company and it starts to grow and scale, that they all need to solve, which is when you've started a company and there's 5 of you or 10 of you, you can do all the different jobs that the people in the company, you're the CEO, you can do all the different jobs. You can work some CS, you can look over the shoulders of the engineers, you can do everything. And you can tell them all, you can be in every meeting, you can be part of every decision. Well, guess what? Once your company gets to be 50, 75, 125, definitely over 100, you can't do that anymore. And you need to figure out, okay, well, how do I distill and communicate what is the essence of how our company is going to think and make decisions, which in the case of a founder-based company mostly comes from the founder. Now, in Amazon's case, there were, Jeff from day one was saying, I want to build Earth's most customer-centric company, but and there were a set of competencies. But to get a little nitty-gritty, specifically what happened is around 2004, one of the HR leaders in the company came in and was tasked with doing some leadership training for the company. And this person astutely observed, well, I cannot teach leadership if we don't define what it means at this company. And her name was Robin Andrulovich, and she said, I need to go out and help you codify what leadership at Amazon means. And so what she did is she actually went out and took Jeff's vision for the company, like where does the company need to go for the next 5 to 10 years, and went around to the senior leaders of the company and asked them, based on this vision, what kind of skills are we going to need to get there? What does role model leadership at Amazon look like today, and what does it need to look like? And then she brought this information back to Jeff and his senior leadership team, and Colin was in these meetings, where then they started to take this information and write out specific leadership principles, sort of a simple tagline like think big or customer obsession, and then a very, very well carefully worded few sentence description for each one. And I can tell you that Jeff and the S team spent, weeks and many hours over many weeks revising and editing these, because as your company grows, your role as leader is to have clear communication about how the company thinks. And so this is really how the leadership principles were developed. And then as we talked about what's most notable, a lot of companies have leadership principles, but they're just posters on the wall. They don't mean anything. You have to take the next step, which is how do you knit those leadership principles into how the company actually operates, thinks, and makes decisions, so that when Jeff Bezos or any senior leader is not in the room, how does everyone actually think about the problem in the right way to make the right decision, even if they weren't there?
And they do change. I mean, it wasn't always
Yes.
14, right?
That's right.
When they
Yeah.
came out, there were 10, and now they're 14. So it underwent one revision. So, a couple of things. If you're at a small organization, you can either define the culture or it's going to define you. And so you just need to choose whether you want to be deliberate and say, this is the type of organization I want, and you need to cultivate that. And also, when you're hiring people, you need to make sure that the people I'm bringing in reinforce this culture. You have a deliberate hiring process. If you don't do that and you go from 5 people to 20 or 30 people, guess what? Those 25 people that you brought in, that's the culture you're going to get. So you need to have a deliberate process to define your culture and then to reinforce it over time. And that's what Jeff, he spent a ton of time always saying, hey, we're not embodying this leadership principle now, or here's how we can make these decisions. He would always fall back on the leadership principles. And, Jeff, I think, is an underrated teacher. He has brilliant insights. Sure, he is by far the smartest person I've ever met. But what he does well to the people in the room, when he will say, here's a decision and here's how I got from point A to point B, and explains that in a way using the principles and Amazon's culture to its advantage.
Excellent. 2 things. Bill, you mentioned the S team, and I don't think we got to cover that in today's presentation. So that's Amazon's term for?
It's Amazon's term for the senior leadership team. Basically, it comprises the people who report directly to Jeff, soon to be the people who report directly to Andy Jassy, as well as a few other most senior leaders. And this, so this is the team of sort of the high council, or the most trusted leaders. And that team meets frequently to review business plans, to review different business proposals, to make important decisions. And they do that, collaboratively as a group. And the reason that Jeff does it that way is that he wants multiple points of view and multiple minds and multiple perspectives to be at the table and around the table to be able to vigorously debate and discuss topics before a decision is made. So the worst thing you could do as a CEO is, frankly, to go off on your own to the mountain and not involve people, make all the decisions on your own. But the smart CEOs and leaders assemble a cabinet, no different than the president's cabinet, a team of senior leaders who advise them and debate and discuss decisions so that people can understand them fully before making a decision.
Great.
And when that, I just add, when the S team was formed, and we had there were 4-hour meetings every week. I was working with Jeff, and I asked him, well, what is the purpose of this, and why, 4 hours is a lot, and they often run to 5 or 6 hours in a week. And he said it is deliberately inefficient if you take a look at how you make an individual decision. But that's not what we're doing with these meetings. I want this to be a cohesive team. So when things get tough, they have the working relationship already and the familiarity with one another in order to make the calls. I don't know what they're going to be, but they will come up. And I may not even be in the room. 2 or 3 of that people on the S team needed to get together and make that call. So, the way he described it is a deliberately inefficient way to make decisions, but it was a very efficient way for it to have a cohesive management team.
That's a really good point. I found that with a lot of startup technology companies, and we know we have students here who are very interested in the Silicon Valley, putting together that team at NetGrosser, we call them air traffic control meetings, just to make sure they were collaborative and cohesive and could face every crisis. And there were many crises.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes. Things will go wrong in your, it all seems from the outside like, oh, it's, everything's beautiful and sunny with Amazon, but man, there are a lot of hard problems we had to tackle all the time.
I want to go back to the bar raiser and hiring, because I do know we have a lot of students on the webinar today. And you said it might sound corny, but go look at the principles and make sure you have an example for each of them. So not only do I think that's not corny, I think that's fabulous advice. First of all, look at Amazon's principles and make sure you have an example for all of them, no matter where you're interviewing. But secondly, do the same for the companies for whom you're going to interview. They may, if they're smart, publish what's important to them. And you should not walk into an interview not knowing what's important to this company and not knowing how you personally can contribute to that.
That's
So,
right.
I would just add, cultures, they are self-reinforcing. You'll get to a company and you'll either love it or you're going to say it's not for me. So, this is a two-way street, the interviewing process. There are plenty of ways to build great companies, but they have different cultures, and you need to figure out for what am I going to do next? Is this an environment where I think I can thrive and participate? And, for some companies, it may not be the right fit for you, and you can vet that out early on in the process versus going for, either the highest salary or the biggest name and that you get for your offers, and choose that, because it's going to be, this is a long journey, and you want to be at a place where you can be your best. And the culture is a large part of that.
This is a lifelong skill that you all need to develop. Some people think like, oh, I'm going to just do this one time. So here are the biggest mistakes I made, and a lot of people make out of both college and out of business. When I came out of business school, getting my MBA, I basically sort of like, oh, I'm just going to take a shotgun approach, send my resume out to a whole bunch of companies. Oh, these all, I didn't really research them. These all sound good. How do I get a bunch of interviews? And then show up at those interviews without having done a lot of research and knowing like exactly, what this company is or what it's all about. That didn't work out very well for me. The best job I ever got was at Amazon, and the amount of preparation I did to understand that company and research it and talk to people who work there and read every single press article I could find and everything I could find about that company, that was I had done my homework. So I gave myself the opportunity to have them offer me that job because I knew my stuff, and B, I have learned so much about the company through that process that I figured out that I would, this place sounds like it's for me. One of the best quotes someone ever had is that someone was leaving Amazon. They said, "I love this place. It was the first place where I felt like a fish in water." Like, you want to find the place where you are a fish in water, not a fish out of water. And for better or worse, this often is a journey. You'll be lucky if you find that with your first job. It may take a while before you get there.
So we have some questions not on hiring. One is, about the process that AWS used to become successful. And I'll just read you the question. I think it's a good one. How did Amazon execute their project so well? For instance, how did AWS develop itself with high quality? Many other companies had the same idea, right? Computing in the cloud, but failed to execute. Is it the talent, the planning, the agile culture, all of this? What do you guys think?
I would say, so what I was working with Jeff at the time and reading probably the first 30 to 40 narrative versions of S3, what are now known as S3 storage, EC2, which is compute. And there was a journey on how, it wasn't S3 when it started, and EC2 wasn't even compute. We didn't know that that was the actual fundamental unit that we were going to offer to customers. So there are plenty of smart people all throughout at different companies, but it's how you harness those people and what is the process you use to come up with great ideas. I personally think that what separated Amazon and allowed Amazon to not only be first, but as it grew, it got better, was the process of slowing down a little bit and having some long-term thinking in order to move fast. And one of the common misconceptions that I've heard about Amazon is long-term thinking means it takes you longer to get to your goal. It often doesn't, because long-term thinking knows where your ending point is. And so you're going to just focus on what is on path to get to that ending point. You're not going to let analysts or pundits tell you, hey, you're doing the wrong thing, or this distracting, shiny thing to hit a quarterly goal. That's going to take you off path, and it eventually takes you longer. So at AWS, we really focused on what fundamentally are we offering with this? And it wasn't even called cloud computing at the time. We were kind of defining, well, what is it really we're offering? And we relied a lot on our internal developers who, were asking for the same things, because our internal software developers were building Amazon.com. And, so we had a good body of customers to ask, is this going to work for you or not? But Jeff was also, and Andy were insistent to say, no, we are going to slow down. There was a version of S3 that was going to launch that we were ready to pull the trigger on and start building. But we realized a couple things. One is we didn't know the reliability characteristics of it well enough. And two, how it would fail was not going to work for companies. You can have like 2 hours of failure a year, but if it's 2 consecutive hours, that's bad when companies are relying on their operations. You'd rather have it spread out, in a matter of microseconds or seconds over the year, if you have an outage, and you can just go retry the request. And we realized how we were going to build it was the wrong way. It was an unpopular decision, and it cost about 6 months, I would say, to delay the launch. And this is when we didn't know, Oracle, IBM, Google, Microsoft, by all rights, they should have been first to the cloud. And so we didn't know they could have launched something during that time period, but we knew that once we launched this, we were going to have a deep relationship with these business partners. They were going to trust us running, core critical operations. And we knew that this thing, as it scaled, it had to get cheaper, it had to get more reliable, and it had to get better. And what we had, didn't meet those criteria at that point. And so, sticking with your core principles is hard sometimes. And the times where it's hardest are when things are going really well or when things are going really poor. And those are the times that you really need to fall back and rely on, what makes Amazon, or what makes, what are our core principles. So I personally, just viewing how that Amazon Web Services started, that's my view on why Amazon did get there first, and why it got there first was something that really took off and grew like a weed or a rocket ship, as Bill said, once it did launch.
So what you said to me, what I heard is customer obsession, right? It wasn't right for our customers, so we delayed it. Actually, I don't even think Amazon was first. I just think when they came out with a splash. But really important to stick to the customer. And Bill, just in your experience with Kindle or Prime Music, similar situations, similar kind of experiences?
Yeah, so we made the opposite mistake. We did the opposite of what AWS did, is actually, and because Amazon, there are plenty of examples where Amazon has done this too, where we actually didn't stick to our core principles, and we rushed something out the door. The very first version of what is now known as Prime Video was called Amazon Unbox, and most of you have either never used it or long since forgotten about it. But it wasn't great, and it wasn't great because we had not, we knew about the ways in which that it could cause different challenges and problems for customers, and we chose to sort of ignore them or not focus on them or not, solve them because we were in ants in our pants to launch at the same time or before Apple launched their service. And it was a terrible mistake. It was not a great customer experience. And so we really had to and I got to tell you that then trying to fix something that's already live and make it better is a lot harder than it is to sort of just start from the right place at the beginning. And these are complex. Look, it was very challenging and very difficult, but I learned so much from that failure that I applied to how I thought about building digital media services and there forward, which, and it took, a long time. It took Prime Video was an overnight success that took me 7 years. So after 7 years of iteration and trying, we finally found the right formula. And now, as you know, it's used by more than 100 million people around the world. But it's about, you're going to have failures. You should actually seek out opportunities where you definitely have a chance to fail, because you will learn the most when you do that.
Yeah, it's not fun when you're in it, but looking back, it probably gives you a lot more than success. We could do a whole other hour just on our favorite failures, I'm sure, or a day, but we can't because we only have a few minutes left. So I'm going to ask you a question that came up in a couple of places. Either one of you can tackle it, and it's a two-part question. What was the toughest thing about working for Amazon, and what was the best thing? And then with that, I'll come back and close us up for the day.
The toughest thing is easy to answer, which is you had to bring your A game every day. I equate it to sort of like if you are fortunate enough to find your way onto the New York Yankees, getting there and staying in the starting lineup, like you have to be on your A game every day, because the company, in the case of Jeff, he set such incredibly high standards for himself and for everyone at the company. And so everything you did, all the work you put in, you had to actually give it, an incredible amount of concentration and effort. That was also the best thing about it, which is that it transformed me in terms of what kind of a manager, what kind of a leader I was before I showed up at that place to the one I was by the time I left in 2014. It was a transformational process to go through that challenge, that test every day for 15 years. The growth, the personal growth I experienced, the professional growth was incredibly and deeply rewarding.
Colin, anything you want to add?
No, I would have said that the same thing. It's hard, but it was fulfilling. So, nothing what we did at Amazon, it was difficult, but it was worth it. And, looking back on it, I learned a lot. And what we're trying to share is how you can do some of these things, in whatever organization you happen to go to next.
So I think that's a really good lesson. Your first job and many of your jobs are going to be hard, but the harder it is, often the more fulfilling. So know you're going to have to work hard, and hopefully that you'll be able to get a lot out of it. And what I loved hearing from Colin and Bill, and feel a fit, feel like you belong. And if you don't, find a place where you do, because we're all going to work for a long time in our careers. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to Professor Greeley for allocating his class time. Thank you to the Dean and to Matt and Aaron for helping me sponsor this event, and to all of the Rutgers folks and friends and family who were on the call today, and most especially to Colin and Bill for a great talk. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having us.